All right, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. First off, I apologize if you hear any music in the background. We do have a Zumba class here at the library tonight, so I'll have some upbeat music playing behind me. Um, Before we begin, first, thank you all for coming tonight. We really appreciate it. Before we begin, we do have a large crowd tonight, so I am going to ask you to all keep yourselves muted during the presentation. And please hold your questions until the end of the event. You can always type your questions in the chat box as we go along. At the end of the event, I'll read all those questions out loud. So I'd like to introduce our two authors for the evening, Matthew Blittner and Russ Cohen.
How you doing?
Matthew Blittner has covered the New Jersey Devils, New York Islanders, and New York Rangers for multiple publications since 2016. He has written for multiple networks and publications and has also hosted a sports talk show on Instagram Live and internet radio entitled Outside the Studio. In 2019, Blittner founded an annual charity softball game for Alzheimer's research. He has authored 5 total books, including Unforgettable Rangers, Unforgettable New Jersey Devils, and now Game Winners, the greatest game-winning goals in hockey history. I'd like to introduce our co-author tonight, Russ Cohen. Russ is a sports writer for Sportsology.com and radio host for the Sportsology Radio Network and covers multiple sports. He has numerous articles published on multiple networks and publications. He has written numerous books, some of which include 100 Ranger Greats, 100 Things New York Rangers fans should know and do before they die, and now Game Winners, the greatest game-winning goals in hockey history. Our event tonight is hosted by David Jurman. David is a Guttenberg resident and has hosted several author talks for the library in the past. So without further ado, I'll turn things over to David.
Thank you, Chelsea, and thank you so much for having us tonight for this event. We really appreciate it and all that the North Bergen Library has done for us in promoting this event. So I first wanted to ask the authors, we heard their bios, but let me start with you, Matthew. Just tell me a little bit more about how you came into writing books and writing articles and so forth, and particularly what drew you to writing about hockey.
Well, first of all, thank you to the North Bergen Public Library. Thank you, Dave. Thank you to everyone here for joining us tonight. Thank you, Russ, for joining as well. It's a very odd and certainly not at all predictable story. I hated writing growing up. I had a teacher in high school who prevented me from taking AP Global History because she said I was a horrible writer, which I did not fight. I readily admitted I was not a good writer. I was going for my master's degree in sports management when after grad school, and I was told I needed an internship. I applied to any sports internship that I could find, and one of them ended up being an editorial internship with Stan Fischler, the hockey maven. A few weeks went by, I hadn't heard from anybody, and then one night, Stan calls me up. We had a very quick phone call. He told me why I was wrong. He asked me my thoughts on Mika Zibanejad and Derek Brassard being traded for each other, just to give you a timeline. He told me all the reasons that I was wrong, but said that he respected my opinions. And by the way, I started the next day at 8 a.m. So that started everything. Then eventually was writing for multiple different publications. And at one point I said to myself, you know what? A lot of writers around me, Russ, a lot of other writers who were in the press box around me, all have written, some form of books, whether it was 1 book, 5 books, 10 books, whatever it is. And I said, you know what? This is probably the logical next step for me. The Rangers were approaching their 25th anniversary of the 94 Cup. I said, all right, this would be a great thing for me to write about. I had about 4 or 5 different ideas that went by the wayside before I eventually settled with, my book Unforgettable Rangers, Games of Moments from the Press Box. And the reception to that was good enough where I ended up then doing 2 more books from that series, Unforgettable Devils, Unforgettable Islanders. And then during the pandemic, I was getting so many great stories on my Instagram show from broadcasters around the league that I decided to do Voices of the NHL. And then Russ and I, we decided to do Game Winners. We started last summer, and hallelujah, here we are.
Wonderful. And Russ, the same question to you. And I know you've also dabbled into, you write about all different kinds of sports and have
Yeah.
dabbled also with baseball as well, too.
Yeah. So yeah, mine starts in 2000. I was originally in like the hotel business and I got out of that. And a friend of mine who was in the hotel business with me, Doug Cataldo, he was a web designer. He started uh, creating websites and he was like, hey, you know a lot about sports. Maybe let's do a sports site together. We started it, Sportsology. It started in 2000. Baseballology was the first one. Then we eventually added hockeyology. By 2001, I was at the NHL draft. I was already becoming like a prospect guy, and lately after that became a prospect expert. I did a show for 15 years on Sirius XM, Hockey Prospect Radio. I'm still on Sirius XM since the beginning on NHL Network Radio, which is around for over 20 years now. And so I've been doing that for a long time. I've written 11 books, some of them about baseball too, New York Mets, and a few other topics. Also did a Flyers book. The 100 Ranger Greats was my second book. My first one actually was called Strike Three. It was about the 94, 95 strike for baseball and with a guy named Nico Riesgo who crossed the picket line. So that book's still out there. So yeah, a long journey. Been doing a lot of writing for different publications. Also, we were doing like what we called internet radio back in 2001. And so before everybody called it a podcast. So I've been doing this for a long time now.
That's wonderful. Now, let's talk about the book and how the idea came about in writing the book, and also how it worked out, like who wrote what in terms of the book, being you both co-authored the book.
Sure.
Well, it
So,
was Matthew's idea. I'll let him start.
yeah. So, um, last summer, I believe it was in June, really. I one day I stumbled upon just this random YouTube video. It didn't belong to the NHL, didn't belong to any of the NHL teams or anything like that. Just some random person who put together video of what they felt were the best goals in hockey history. Not the best game-winning goals, not the most aesthetic goals, just the best goals. And some of them absolutely, you can't argue with being there. And then others were really just completely head scratch, and I was just like, all right, this really doesn't make sense. This person doesn't know what they're doing. And so after marinating on it for, a day or two, in one of my routine phone calls with Russ, because I do write for him for sportsology.com, I said, you know what? Let me just, I'm going to broach the topic with Russ. Maybe this can be a good book, but instead of just the best goals, we'll do, best game winning goals. And Russ went along with it. He has history doing list type books, most notably his top 75 NBA players. And so, he went along with it. And then we said, all right, let's get started on this. Took us a little while to get our, respective lists of, what we felt were, my 50 goals, his 50 goals. Obviously, there was some overlap, as there would be with any list. And then, he vetoed some of mine, I vetoed some of his. And we were left with 50 goals, and then we had a few left over, which we turned into our honorable mentions. And that's pretty much our story. Russ, if you want to, join in on anything there.
Yeah, I mean, Matthew covered a lot of it. We had some calls. We did get some outside opinions. We took a little bit of direction, not a lot. You never want to have too much, but just wanted to kind of get people's ideas of where they think our list is at and such, and some people in the know. And so that always helped, and we thank them for that. We also wanted to write about some of the things that we've been at, some of the things that we've experienced, so we could really, dig into it. There's plenty of things here that obviously predates us, and we didn't want to like leave out history and make it just recent. So we didn't do that either. And then we didn't want to make it too broad, so we did make it NHL and Olympics. But like, of course, my Canadian friends were like, "What about the Summit Series, the 72 Summit Series?" I'm like, no, we had to limit it because all of a sudden, if there's, if you allow the Summit Series, it's all here. So we had to narrow scope, and then we added a few wrinkles. We wanted to add our opinion on each goal. So even if he wrote a certain chapter, we both commented on the goal, and then I came up with a rating system that Matthew didn't like, but we did it anyhow. because I know people like that, and I don't mind doing that. Just talking about maybe degree of difficulty for the goal that went in. And so, I feel like anything extra you could provide like that is a good value add for a book. So, yeah, we eventually got the list together, and it took a little while, and we got it out before the holidays, and that was the main goal. So that was it, and it's been out now, and we're really happy with it.
Yeah, you have in each segment of each of the goals you talk about this little analysis at the end that each of you individually do. Whose idea was that? And could you talk a little bit more about that whole process?
I don't know. I think it was both of us, right? I mean, I don't think that was one or the other.
Yeah, we both knew from the get-go we needed to each provide our reasoning for it. The difference in it is Russ gives it, 1 star, he gives it out of 5. I don't. I gave it more of just without giving it a number, giving it more of, why I felt this goal belongs. And he didn't realize I was doing that. I didn't realize he was doing his way until the book was about 80% complete. And we were just like, oh, well, this is a bit of a pickle. So we decided, you know what? It actually shows a decent contrast in how we think as well. Because, there are some goals where, okay, yeah, if you give it 5 out of 5, or if or even without numbers, if you just say, oh, well, it was so incredibly difficult and skilled, and like, you have to find a way to differentiate. Otherwise, we're just gonna be saying the same thing, and who wants to read the same thing twice? So we left it in our each individual voice, also the same way that like the background for each goal was written. Russ has his style of how he wants to give the information about the goal, and I have my style. That way, you have to put a little bit of yourself into it as well. Otherwise, what separates us from any other list book that's out there?
Now, you ended up having 50 game-winning goals that you talked about in the book. You both mentioned you kind of came to the writing with your own lists and so forth. How was the process in whittling it down to the 50 game-winning goals that are written about in the book? And I imagine there must have been some debate between the two of you.
I mean, I told Matthew his list stinks, and he should just look at mine. I mean, no, we we went back and forth quite a bit, and we had phone calls, and there was, until we came up with the honorable mention part, we were kind of being cutthroatish about it, and then we were like, there's too many. Like we should have an honorable mention because some of them they're really good that are going to be left off this list. Like, hockey's been around a while, so that was difficult.
Yeah, it look, again, as I said earlier, like, there are some goals that just they have to be on, regardless of who's writing the list, whoever's coming up with the list. Especially once you narrow it down to it's just going to be NHL and a couple of Olympics. It's like there are things that have to be there. You have to have the Stefan Matto goal. You have to have the Jason Arnott goal. You have to have the Mike Eruzione goal. You have to have Bob Nystrom's goal. Like, these are non-negotiables. Like, like, we would be without credibility if like there are some goals that we just didn't include. And I know, Russ has said that, he has some friends up in Canada who still say, well, how did you not have this goal? Well, but that's the wonderful thing about a list book. You're never going to please everybody. And we say right there in the introduction, this book is meant to start a debate, not end it. So for us, obviously, Russ favored some things with more of like the outdoor games because of how important they were to the league. And let's be honest, the league is not where it is today without the Winter Classic, without the Stadium Series, without some of those games. And for me, I certainly favored maybe some very prolonged overtimes where maybe, everyone knows that the longer the overtime goal, the less chance of it actually being a pretty goal, the less chance of it being an actually impressive goal. It's more just a feat of stamina and endurance. But I tend to favor something that, oh, triple overtime, quadruple overtime, quintuple overtime. Okay, that's got to go in there. So it each shows our own respective thought process.
A lot of the list is 67 on the expansion era up to the present day, but then also you go back to the 30s and so forth with some games. What kind of research did you have to do in terms of looking at the early history of the NHL and then determining if that was part of making the top 50?
Well, as an example, so like that 50 Stanley Cup game, because I had written a couple Ranger books, it had come up in the books. It's famous because the Rangers didn't play any home games. They favored the circus over the hockey team, so they played their home games in Toronto. That's a great place, right? So they didn't play one game at home in that Stanley Cup against Detroit. But I also watched it on a VCR tape because one of the guys I wrote the Ranger book with, John Halligan, was a PR director for like 35 years, and he had an MSG broadcast where they actually broadcasted most of that game. So I watched that game. So I was able to, do that. And then at one point, I was able to talk to one of the older Ranger players about it. At the time, his name was Edgar Laprade, and I think he was the 1940 Calder Award winner, for Rookie of the Year. And he was like 92, 93 when I spoke to him. And so he had played in that game. So, you don't want to lose history that way. And he actually felt like he scored and won and won the game. But he said the goal went through the side. The refs didn't see it. One of his teammates may have seen it. Nobody else really kind of noticed it. Things like that did happen in those days. I couldn't say it didn't happen. So we kind of mentioned that that's what he told me. And, he passed away a few years later. So I wanted to make sure at least his words got out there. So you don't want to lose history if you could help it, if you know it. And I knew it. So.
Yeah, and with the history, I mean, Owen, Dan, you mentioned we have goals in the 1930s. If you're gonna go, it's one thing to say, okay, we're just gonna do expansion era from 67 on, but we didn't do that. Obviously, as you mentioned, Russ just talked about 1950. At that point, you've got to go all the way back because it's way too arbitrary to say, oh, we're just gonna stop in 1945 or we're just gonna stop in 1950. You've got to go all the way back, and also in the 30s, you had the only two 6 overtime games in history. What are we doing as authors, as hockey people, if when about the greatest game-winning goals, if you don't mention the 2 longest games in NHL history? Again, it goes back to, I've mentioned credibility before. We don't have any credibility if we're not putting a limit on how far back we're going. You have to go as far back as that takes you.
For our viewers who perhaps aren't that highly knowledgeable about the National Hockey League, could you talk a little bit about who the original 6 were and that history of hockey pre-1967? When people say original 6, what are they talking about?
Yeah,
Sure.
Go ahead, Matt.
So the original 6 is actually a misnomer because way back when there were more than 6 teams. Okay, everyone today thinks of the original 6 as the Rangers, the Blackhawks, the Bruins, the Red Wings, the Leafs, and the Canadiens. Okay, that's great. And from 1942 to 1967, it was considered the era of the original 6, those 25 years. But the National Hockey League didn't start in 1942. The National Hockey League started in 1917. You had teams that they would last for a year, they would fold. You would add teams that, the Vancouver Millionaire, Vancouver had a team, Seattle had a team.
Seattle team, yeah.
Montreal had 2 teams. You had the Montreal Maroons, for crying out loud. Toronto had another team. New York, the Rangers weren't the first NHL team to play at Madison Square Garden. The New York Americans were.
And they hated each other. The Americans and the Rangers hated each other.
And the Americans actually were owned at one point by a bootlegger during who made his money during Prohibition. And there's actually a fun story, and it's not in the book, but there's a fun story about how I believe it was the Red Wings came into the Garden, and way back then, obviously there's no plexiglass around. Plexiglass hadn't been invented yet. So they had the old chicken wire, which, it's not to stop everything from going through. And so at one point, one of the American players had scored a goal. There's dispute whether the puck actually went in the net or not. And the Detroit, again, I believe it was Detroit, the goalie gets irate that the goal light went on, saying that the puck didn't go in, and he goes charges over because at the time the official scores, there wasn't the official scores table and everything. So there was a goal judge right behind the net, right behind the chicken wire. So he's yelling at the guy, thinking he's just an average goal judge, and he's getting heated as hockey players do. And he takes the butt of his stick and he jams it through the chicken wire and hits the guy in the nose. Well, little did he know, but the die worked for the Americans. And remember, the owner of the Americans was basically a mob die. So if the owner is a mob die, the people who work for him are mob people. The old judge didn't take too kindly to that. The player is back in his hotel room later on when all of a sudden the police show up at his door. And, he's perplexed. Why the New York City police at his door? And like, we got to get you out of here. What do you mean you got to get me out of here? There's been a hit taken out on you. What do you mean there's been a hit? There's been a hit taken out because the guy who you hit with your stick, he's not just a old judge. He's also in the mob. And so he blew it off. He figured, nah, I'm gonna be fine. Next day he's walking around he's walking around New York City, and a guy pulls a gun on him. And he like just barely avoids getting shot. He's like, all right, I gotta get the hell out of here. He gets on the next train back to Detroit. So the original six was it's a misnomer because all these teams existed and then folded. The original six is really just the six teams that came out of World War II still in.
Right.
And why did the Americans not make it and the Rangers made it? The Americans were
'Cause
those teams that folded.
Because the Rangers were the landlords and they booted him out of the Garden eventually. So they kicked him out in the street.
And
There's actually
wasn't there talk?
There's more to it. So because of World War II, obviously a lot of players both in Canada and the US went off to fight in the war, just like Major League Baseball players went off to fight in the war. And so the Americans, they had so many players go off to fight that they couldn't field a full roster of a team. So ownership said to the league, listen, we're gonna cease operations temporarily. They had an agreement with the league that they're gonna cease operations, the war's gonna end eventually, and then they'll come back. And the owner of the Rangers then screwed them and turned the league against them. So when the war ended, they refused to let them back into the league, and that's when then Red Dutton, who was in charge of the Americans, put his fabled curse on the Rangers, saying the Rangers will not win another Stanley Cup. Red Dutton died, I think it was 1988. It was either 88 or 89, somewhere around there. Rangers didn't win the Cup till 94. As you can see, his curse clearly worked out. So
Did it? I don't know.
Hey, he said they won't win a Cup, and they didn't win a Cup until a few years after he died. I call that working out for him.
Mm-hmm. You secured Pete Stemkowski to write the foreword. Who is Pete Stemkowski, and how did you come about to have him write the foreword?
Yeah, we both know Pete. I got to know him for the first couple of Ranger books I did, and did some book signings with him even previous to knowing Matthew because of the 100 Ranger Greats book. And, he was in the league. He's one of the few people alive that has a 1967 Toronto Maple Leafs Stanley Cup ring. So he's that, and he's a really good player, good guy. Matthew roped him into coaching us one year for the softball league, gala, and it was interesting because Pete said something to me on the bench, like he was the manager, and I was just like the captain, and he goes, "Why don't you go out and like in the second inning, he goes, why aren't you out there?" And I'm like, well, I want to be fair. I want to give everybody playing time. He goes, yeah, but you're my best first baseman. I'm like, don't worry, I'll play more in the late innings. We got to give everybody a chance. So Pete was, even as a softball manager for just a charity game, he was intense.
Yeah, and he's been great to me as well throughout my career, Pete. I started my career as an intern for Stan Fischler, and so him and Pete were, friendly for more decades than I think either of them would care to admit. And so I would see Pete around the garden a lot. You'd be there for a morning skate, and then he'd be, walking around, and, you've got a lot of downtime between the end of morning skate and before the game begins. And so we'd just be chatting with him. And so he was always someone who just he was around, and, he had a triple overtime game-winning goal in the playoffs for the Rangers against the Blackhawks in the early 70s. And, so again, triple overtime, that's pretty significant. You watch the playoffs. I don't think any game even went to triple overtime this year in the playoffs.
Not triple, I don't think so.
We had some double overtimes. We had some close balls. I don't think we had any triple overtime. It's not that common to see a game go to triple overtime, so we knew we had to have them in the book. We had to have the goal in the book. So once you've got the goal in the book, it's like, hey, Pete, we're talking about you in our book. Would you mind writing the forward too? And he was great about it.
Yeah, one more thing about the goal. So one of the guys who got the assist is Ted Irvine, and some people know him, some don't, but they know his son because he's Chris Jericho, the wrestler. So that was years later, that was a fun thing. Chris Jericho actually plugged our Ranger book, and it was on Twitter, and it was nice. But Ted, great guy, really good hockey player, and so yeah, there's that little connection there too.
Well, it was a great score because he's got a great history with the Maple Leafs and the Rangers.
Yeah.
He kind of spans the pre-expansion era and the expansion era when he played. So it was wonderful you were able to secure him to write the forward. So the cover, that's taken at a Winter Classic hockey game at Citi Field. You talked before about how important the Winter Classic was to the continued growth of the NHL. How'd you decide on that for your cover?
We had a bunch of photos between myself and Matthew, and we were throwing them back and forth, like which one do you like best? We'd crop it, we'd look at it, and that one came out. So it was just, of course, people were going to say, oh, especially me because I'm a Met fan. They'd be like, oh, you're biased because it's Citi Field, but really Matthew chose it more than I did. So people should blame him, not me.
Okay, I'll shoulder the blame. I have no problem on it. When you're writing, when you're doing a book, I mean, you have to also consider, things that go into it, rights, licenses, and stuff. And if you want to talk about, oh well, there's all these great photos out there. Okay, yeah, there's all these great photos. Are you willing to spend $5,000 to rent out a photo? Are you willing to give someone 3% of your royalties of a book that you don't even know how many copies it's going to sell? You can't, from a business standpoint, you can't really do that. I don't remember whether that it was a photo that I had taken or if Russ had taken. We both covered that Winter Classic.
Right.
Actually, we both even skated on the ice at
Yep.
the media skate a couple days beforehand. So yeah, that's what we own the rights to that one ourselves, and it's a great photo. And so we decided to go along with it. And I do have to give a shout out to my friend Alana Yavitz for then actually designing it. Just because we have a photo, you've got to put the words on there. You got to make everything look good. And after a couple of different iterations,
It took a little while.
Yeah. Alana did a great job in terms of being able to put
She
the words
did.
the way we like it, and really making the cover pop.
Now the book's been out for a while. What's some of the feedback you got? I'm sure it's kind of created a lot of good debate in terms of the list and maybe things that readers felt should have been in or not in or whatever. I was curious what just the reader feedback you've both been getting so far.
I'll let Matthew go first. He gets more than I do.
So, the reader feedback that I get, well, there has been, positive. There's also been some who, in the media who have been like, we should take a baseball bat to your head. We should take a baseball bat to your kneecaps. There are some people like, how is number 2 not number 1? How is, how's number 9 not number 1? How, you don't know what you're talking about. Oh, how's this goal not in there? How come the number 1 goal is rated, by Russ is rated 4 out of 5. So how's it number 1 if it's 4 out of 5? Yet, the number 11 goal is 5 out of 5. So yeah, Russ gets all the rosy comments.
I do.
I'm the punching bag that you hang at your local gym for the boxers to go practice on before they go to the ring. But it's all in good fun. And like I said before, and it's right there in the intro, this book is meant to start debates, not end them. So you want to have a civil conversation? By all means, as long as the baseball bats are put away, the hockey sticks are put away, the boxing gloves are put away, we'll debate you till we're blue in the face.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to get into now some of the book and specifically, some of the choices. I'm going to pretty much focus in on just the New York teams, being that we're in the New York, New Jersey area, to focus on that. But it is important for people to know they cover, all different teams, and also cover some Olympic games are on the list as well, too. So we touched on this. You touched on it a little bit before that Red Wings. The title is Red Wings Win Strange Cup Final, 1950. And it's just incredible to think that the Rangers could not play a home game at Madison Square Garden and that they had to play their home games in Toronto, and
Well, it
maybe
was a
why not
choice.
in? I'm sorry.
It was a choice for management.
Yeah.
It
So if
wasn't.
you could
Yeah,
talk about it, that'd be great,
yeah,
Russ.
yeah. No, it was just it was a. They made more money off the circus. Hockey didn't make enough money, so they were like, sorry. And years later, even Emil Francis, who was the Rangers like coach and GM, the circus was still there, and they would still get games not moved out, but changed, play during the day. Sometimes they couldn't play. They had to be on the road for elongated road games because the circus was there for a couple of weeks. And one time, above his office, there was an elephant in the room. It was like a waiting room, and went to the bathroom, and it leaked down into Francis's office. And that's when he kind of blew his stack, and he went to management. He said, "We can't do this anymore. Like this has to end. This isn't." And so they finally did, but that was, way into the late, I want to say late 60s, early 70s. So yeah, they finally did stop doing it, but it went on. And so yeah, Gordie Howe, I think, got injured in game one, wasn't even there for most of the cup. Just one of those things that happens. Who is it? Pete Babando is the guy who scores the game winner for that one. It's a cool one. Like if you get to see footage of it, it's crazy because like they didn't have Zambonis, so the ice just looks like it's in horrible shape. It's just I can only imagine what it was like to skate on that and to try and play, and and they did, and these guys were really good. So it is a legendary one for like not so much for the finish. I'm sure Detroit fans feel good about it, but it's just because of the weird circumstances, really.
And despite that, the Rangers almost won the series without having a
They
game played
did.
in New York.
Yeah.
You can thank
And
Don
the
Paul
Knicks
for that.
also the Knicks also faced that same issue in the early 50s as well too. They went to the NBA Finals, and they had to, I believe, move some of their finals games to an armory in New York City
But at
because of
least
the
it was still in New
circus.
York. The Rangers were in
Yeah, right.
Toronto.
They were able to keep it in New York because there was another basketball court, but the Rangers
Right.
had to not only leave the United States, not only leave New York, they had to leave the United States to play their home games. Interesting. Number 47, John Tavares, 1993 to 2016. It's amazing to think that from 1988 until 2016, with the exception of the 1993 season, the New York Islanders, with their proud franchise history during that 10-year 74 to 84 run, and they're still the last North American professional franchise to win 4 championships in a row in any sport, would go from 1993 to 2016 without winning one playoff series, which is staggering. But then, of course, John Tavares and the goal there. Could you talk about that in 2016?
Sure. So, the Islanders at that point, they're at Barclays Center. It's Brooklyn. It's a whole new thing. Whatever Islander fans think of John Tavares now, and I'm not gonna say that they're wrong. I'm not gonna say that they're right. Whatever Islander fans think of Tavares now, he put their season on his shoulders. As a captain should, and as a star player should. He scored the game-tying goal late in the game, and he ended up scoring the game-winning goal in overtime. We beat the Panthers. That was a series that, like, they didn't really. It was very much either team could win it. Florida had opportunities in that series to close out the Islanders. The Islanders showed their resiliency, and Tavares came through in a big way for them. And it was, it's one of those weird, funky things, as you said, not since 1993. Well, the Panthers, up until a couple of years ago, hadn't been out of the first round since what, 96? The Maple Leafs, up until a couple of years ago, hadn't been out of the first round since 02. There's just some times where you have these weird, unexplainable, long, streaks. And I mean, the Islanders didn't make it to the playoffs every single year during that streak. Obviously, the mid 2000s weren't necessarily the kindest to them. But Tavares came through, authored his Islander moment, so to speak. And again, whatever Islander fans think of him, without him, they could have very much been looking at it very differently, because when they ended up going to the playoffs a couple of years later against and falling to Carolina in the second round, they might not have even gotten to that, because they could have blown up the team if they didn't make it out of that first round against Florida. And then who knows what type of team they are, if they even make the playoffs, if they even get past the first round. And I believe it was 2018, 2019. No, like 2019. So they should be thanking Tavares at least for giving them that.
Number 28, JP Parisi upsets the Rangers in 1975. That to me ended the Emile Francis era. The Rangers, who had gone from making that final in 1950 and not even winning a playoff series till that Chicago series in 1971, Russ, if I'm correct. That was the first time they won a playoff series in 21 years. They finally were now finding their footing, and in my opinion, had Stanley Cup level championship teams during that early 70s era. They went to the finals, of course, in 1972 and lost to Boston, but they always seemed to have some kind of tough break in the playoffs, but they were as good as any team during that era. And then comes along a franchise in their third season, I believe, third season, the New York Islanders, this upstart franchise from Uniondale, New York, comes in. And in those days, they had these, I guess, preliminary rounds of best of three. And if you could take it from there.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up on Long Island, so I grew up 20 minutes from the Coliseum. And so, but I was a Ranger fan because I grew up, I was like in 1972 is when I sort of got into hockey. So it was a year before the Islanders got there. So JP Parisi not only upset the Rangers, he upset me. That was that was a bad goal. But the fun thing was, like, people would see my dad on the street and think he was JP Parisi sometimes if he didn't shave for a few days. He had the same 5 o'clock shadow, similar look, but it was a great goal. And it was one of those, I think it was Gilles Villemure who was in net. Now, I got to say, I mean, these days that goal wouldn't hold up because he really crashed the net. And these days it would at least be under review, don't you think, Matt?
Oh, but that's without question. Now, whether it would be overturned or not,
that's a different story.
A completely different story, because no one knows what constitutes goalie interference anymore. Right. I don't think anyone ever actually knew, but we most certainly don't know what it constitutes. But
in those days, it was a good goal, and it was a big goal for their franchise for sure.
Scored in the first few seconds, if I'm not mistaken, of overtime.
Yeah, I think it was. It was early.
Yeah, and I mean, if you think about it, fast forward, his son Zach Parisi then playing for the Islanders. Zach was very open and honest. One of the reasons he wanted to play for the Islanders was because his dad played there.
Yeah.
So it ends up being a very nice little father-son thing, because how many, and I know in hockey it's more so than other sports where you see plenty of fathers and sons, or fathers and brothers, or fathers and nephews, or uncles and nephews, or cousins, whatever it is. But it's still nice to be able to see that father and son, however many years apart, still were able to play for the same franchise.
And then we fast forward 9 years later, and once again, sadly for the Rangers, their season ends in dramatic fashion when 1980 Olympian Ken Morrow scores a goal against the Rangers in the playoffs in '84.
Yeah, I mean, it was sort of like a Hail Mary shot. It went in. It was one of those, I would call it like almost like a seeing eye goal. What annoyed me at the time was, how many goals did Ken Morrow have in the playoffs that year? One. The entire playoffs, he had one. That was it. And it just seemed like, early in my years, that was the Rangers' luck in those days. And it just seemed like that's what the kind of stuff that happened. So it was just, again, another infuriating one. But, Ken Morrow is a great hockey player, obviously.
Yeah, and I mean, to think about it, the Rangers, during the Islanders dynasty, the Rangers played the Islanders in the playoffs every single year. And they got knocked out by the Islanders every single year, whether it was the first round, second round. The Rangers made it to the playoffs every year. Sometimes they beat teams, sometimes, and lost to the Islanders every single time. Everyone
At least there was one time where I used to work at Roosevelt Field Mall, so I worked right around the corner from the Coliseum. And one time I talked one of my people who worked with me to, let's go and see if we can go in and get Rangers Islanders playoff tickets. I said, let's just go up to the ticket office and see if there's any cancellations. Back in those days, it would happen. There was a cancellation, so we went in, and that was one of the rare games where at least the Rangers won. I think it was Glenn Hanlon in net. So that's it. Other than that, like Matthew said, it was all zeros.
Yeah, everyone wants to complain nowadays. Oh, Edmonton and LA played
Right.
what is it, 4 straight years in the first round. Hey, you know what? At least the Rangers made it past the first round a couple of times. Before falling to the Islanders, then as opposed to LA that hasn't been able to get out of the first round against the same team 4 straight years.
Or you can go Brooklyn Dodgers Yankees. Like, how frustrating was that for them?
I'm a Yankee fan. I can't.
My parents were my mom was a huge Brooklyn Dodger fan, so it was frustrating.
Until 1955.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're kind of curious, just a quick aside, Russ, in the midst of that Islander 4 Stanley Cup championships in a row run, when the Rangers were playing a Ranger Islander game at the Coliseum, would there still be a large amount of Ranger fans at the Coliseum during that run, particularly 82, 83, or by that point in time, was it all Islander fans?
It was
at the
mostly
Coliseum
Islanders.
during the
I was
playoff
really,
games?
yeah, I was really outnumbered. Like if I was there, if I wore a Ranger jersey, I was really outnumbered. It didn't get like what a lot of people knew for a long time in the, let's say the 90s and 2000s where the Ranger fans just kind of took over. That didn't happen then. The Islander fans were there. They were loud. They would yell at you, but they were, nothing ever happened. They were good. But as an example, like in my yearbook, I got killed because everybody in my high school rather, was Islander fan. There were some of us that were Ranger fans, not too many. And I remember one year I went back and looked, and people, I would say 50% of the remarks in my book were about the Islanders being so much better than the Rangers.
And just as an
Chelsea,
aside, sorry, just as an aside, you
please.
want to talk about, oh, well, Islander fans, not, they got taken over a little bit in the 2000s. I got news for you. When I was in college, so, early to mid 2010s, a couple of my friends and I, one of my friends is an Islander fan, and our other friend was getting into hockey, and he had never been to any hockey games before. So we had a large debate over, do we take him to the Garden for a Ranger game? Do we take him to Nassau Coliseum for an Islander game? So this is before the Islanders left to go to Barclays. And obviously, Nassau Coliseum was cheaper tickets. So as college students, didn't know it's a cheaper ticket. I think we spent $30 to sit directly behind the Islander bench right up against the glass. And out of protest, I actually wore a Ranger shirt to the game. And they weren't playing the Rangers, and Islander fans let me have. They put me up on the scoreboard not once, 3 times during the game, during the national anthem,
Really?
during the beginning of the third period, and then at the end of the third period when they were losing 7-2 to the Minnesota Wild.
Oh my goodness!
They put me up on the thing with the word saying "Boo this man."
But that was
Goodness.
at least it was a
Gee.
small scoreboard in those days. What was it, like Univision or Islander Vision? I forget what they used to call it.
But I'm just saying, so Islander fans, yeah, they maybe got run out a little bit in the early 2000s, but they came back in force.
Oh my goodness, that's something else. Oh, Trudy, excuse me, Chelsea. Do we want to have any questions? We have about 15 minutes left. I certainly don't want to neglect any people who have questions for our two co-authors.
We do have a few questions in the chat box, and I want to remind everybody that if you do have any questions, you can just type them in the chat box and I'll read them out loud. So the first question that I have waiting, what is it like writing a book with a co-author versus writing a book by yourself?
I'll let Matt go first, and then I can give my experience.
All right, well, so my first 4 books were all written just by me. I knew going into this project, once I had thought, oh, this might be a good book idea, that you need a co-author for something like this because you have to be able to bounce things off each other. You have to be able to balance things out, especially for like a list style book where it's really, you're not just telling a story. You're not just telling facts about an event that happened. You're literally putting a list together that's going to be debated no matter what. And so you need to have a co-author in place, and it's both a blessing and a curse because there's sometimes where you think, oh, you might be right, but the co-author will show you that, maybe you're wrong, actually wrong, and actually explain it to you. So it helps with that part of a book of being able to, get a second set of eyes on it, so to speak, other than just necessarily having like an editor run through things. But it's an interesting thing having a co-author, and I certainly think that I got a great one here.
Thanks. I've only really done it with co-authors. I mean, forever, and it's because a lot of projects seem to come my way after that Ranger book, and so I enjoy the interaction. I think it's great that you get the different opinions. Sometimes, like Matt said, you have differences in the way the guys write. Sometimes you try and match each other's style. It depends on what the vision is. I did write one by myself called Pioneers of Baseball, and it was my wife's idea. So I went through with that. That was a little terrifying at the beginning because I had never done it all by myself, but I got through that too. So yeah, it's just I like it with a co-author better though.
Excellent. Thank you so much. The next question on the list. How long did it take to write the book? Were there any last-minute goal additions?
So we initially planned to have the book out in like middle of November, roughly.
Yeah.
That was our initial goal. And we first came up with our list probably end of June, beginning of July. But confluence of factors, I had a few things go on last year. Russ had a few things go on. So it ended up not coming out till the middle of December. So what is that? Roughly about 5.5, 6 months for the book, which I would call probably about a mid-range for me. I mean,
It is.
my Ranger book was done in 2 months from first interview to publication, whereas my Voices of the NHL book was like a year and a half. So yeah, it about 5.5, 6 months roughly. And we did have we had 2 late additions. Wayne Gretzky's hat trick against the Panthers in the playoffs for the Rangers. That was his first New York hat trick. And Jacques Lemaire's cup-winning goal in '79 for Montreal to give them their 4-peat.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of books do take about a year. Uh, we did a Ranger book and a New York Mets book though for Triumph, and they really compressed it to like I want to say 4 months. And the Ranger one, I mean the Mets one rather, is called Numbers Don't Lie, so it was a statistical book, and that was kind of tough to do it in that short of amount of time. The baseball one I did on my own, I would say took about 6 to 8 months. But a lot of times it takes a year because if it's around 100,000 words and you have to get a lot of photos in there and put it all together, it really does take time, and you work on it every day. Like that's really the secret. If you do it and you do it like gangbusters for a couple months and then you don't do anything for a couple months, that's when it becomes hair raising. I've never done it that way, but I understand people do, and that's when you see like the Everybody Loves Raymond episode where Ray Romano's like in his basement for like a whole weekend or a week trying to make up that time. So it's hard to make up that time when a publisher gives you a deadline. So, but I would say a year is normal.
Yeah, and just to give an idea, Russ just mentioned the 100,000 words. This book, just to give an idea, I just looked, was just about 62,000 words.
Thank you. And the final question that I currently have in the chat box: when you were choosing the top 50 goals, what criteria did you choose to look at when making your decisions?
So we had a number of factors. Historical relevance, difficulty of the goal. Was it a simple old tap in? Was it in between the legs, around the bat? What was the move? What was the skill set required for it? What time of game was it? Was it in overtime? Was it in triple overtime? Was it in the first period? Because remember, game-winning goal can technically happen any time in a game. It doesn't have to happen in overtime. It doesn't have to happen in the third period. If the game's 1-0 and the only goal scored is 35 seconds into the first period, guess what? That's your game-winning goal. There's been a little over, going into this season, there were a little over 11,000 game-winning goals in hockey history, because obviously for a number of years there were, ties allowed in the NHL. So those games obviously didn't have game-winning goals. And then, so historical significance, difficulty, when it happened, those were pretty much the key factors. But then, as we each have our own way of doing things.
Yeah, the interesting part about it is a lot of times when people would mention a goal to me, they would realize like halfway in mentioning it, oh wait, that's not a game winner. Or was that a game winner? I have to go and look now. And so that's the thing is there are, hundreds of thousands of great goals, but not all of them were game winners. So then, yeah, then you do have to narrow it down, and that's where we did get a few that we added later because it was like, these are people of significance. These were pretty big deal. Let's see where they could fit in, and so yeah, sometimes those came along too.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So that was all of the questions that I had in the chat box from the audience. David, do you have one final question just to finish us off, or did you finish your list?
Yes. So I can't end this conversation without discussing your choice of number one. This is the one that I really take exception to. You have number two, Mike Eruzione, Do You Believe in Miracles, which not
Hmm.
only was an incredible goal, most people consider the 1980 Olympic team the greatest team, maybe it was a great sports moment of the 20th century. That's how huge that goal was for Mike Eruzione beating the Soviet Union in the semifinal game, by the way,
Hmm.
not this gold medal game, but
Right.
the game prior to the gold medal game to get the United States to the 1980 gold medal game versus Finland. You have that number two ahead of Bob Nystrom, scores the goal in 1980. Of course, that was that great goal that won the Islanders their first championship in 1980 against the Flyers, Game 6 of the Nassau Coliseum, started the four-year dynasty.
Hmm.
Certainly a landmark goal, no question about it. But I just have to ask you why that would be ahead of such a landmark moment in American sports history at number two.
Well, and I'll let Russ get into it in a minute. As you mentioned, it wasn't the gold medal game, whereas Nystrom won the Stanley Cup. And in hindsight, not only did he win the Stanley Cup, he kicked off, as you said, their dynasty. And everyone knew that if the Islanders would have lost Game 6, they probably lose. They almost certainly lose Game 7 to Philadelphia because they
Yeah.
had the history of choking. Who knows what happens to the franchise if they lose that Stanley Cup after all their chokes in the late 70s? And with Eruzione, yeah, great goal, but again, not overtime. It did, Nystrom was overtime. Eruzione, it was in the middle of the game. It wasn't that late, and again, it didn't win them the gold medal. And you said, oh well, it got them to the gold medal game. Well, technically yes, but also technically no. If the way the Olympics worked that year, if the U.S. would have lost to Finland in that game, then Finland, what depending on what happened in Russia's next game, Russia would have won the Soviet Union would have won the gold medal, not Finland. So you can't technically call that the gold medal game as a default gold medal game because the U.S. only won it based upon the system that they had in place at that time. So yeah, it's a great historical landmark moment. And I can already hear people, fellow New Jersey Devils media people who have given me grief over this, yelling all the way from Prudential Center or wherever they may be at the moment.
And contact Matt on
this.
that. Make sure. Yeah.
But it won the cup in overtime, kickstarted a dynasty, and basically saved the franchise. And one dotted the U.S. to the opportunity to compete for a gold medal.
Yeah, my only thing is we're not diminishing Mike Eruzione's goal, but David, you said it yourself. Like the Islanders, 4 cups is like the gold standard for any sport. You even said that. So I think you even in some way can understand it, even though you may not fully be on board with it. You kind of led the conversation that way early on.
Well, the book is wonderful. I highly recommend it to anyone interested in hockey history or just the game of hockey in general. Matthew and Russ, congratulations on a wonderful,
Thanks.
terrific book. We wish you all the best with the book. And Chelsea, thank you so much for having us tonight. We really appreciate it.
Thank you,
you.
David. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Russ, so much
Thanks,
for coming out
Chelsea.
this evening. That was such a wonderful event. And I want to say big thank you to our audience as well for coming out this evening. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a very
Appreciate it.
good night.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.